Have you ever felt unappreciated by the very people you've given so much of yourself to? Have you ever wondered what happens when the love, care, and support you so willingly provide to your children or family isn't returned in the way you hoped? This video will uncover the harsh reality of what happens when respect and appreciation are missing in family relationships, and how that lack can have a profound impact on your well-being as you get older. By sticking with us until the end, you'll gain insights into how even the smallest decisions can affect your happiness, health, and emotional well-being in your later years. From navigating the challenging dynamics within families to learning how to protect your independence and preserve your dignity, this video offers valuable wisdom and strategies to help you live a more fulfilling and peaceful life. Don't miss out on this essential advice, which can help you avoid the common pitfalls many face as they age. Stay tuned, because the knowledge shared here could change the way you view your relationships and the direction of your future. If you're not subscribed yet, I encourage you to subscribe and activate the notification bell so you never miss a video. Your support means the world to me, and if you enjoyed this content, please consider liking and sharing it to help me spread these important lessons. If you connect with this topic, please comment 1 to let me know. If not, feel free to comment 0 to share your thoughts and help me improve the content I create for you. Now, let's get started. Facing these kinds of changes can be difficult, and it's completely normal to feel a sense of loss, confusion, or even frustration. But it's important to remember not to respond in anger or try to reason with frustration. 6 words can help resolve many conflicts. Don't get angry. Stay calm and smile. In the popular TV series Seasons of Change, a young character named Jack Harrison caught my attention. Jack was born into a wealthy family, surrounded by every luxury, yet his parents, always busy with their careers, paid little attention to his education or personal development. Jack, feeling neglected, would often run away from home, act out, and get into fights. Disrespect for others became a habit for him, and he showed little regard for anyone, including his parents. On his first day at a new school, when Jack arrived on the sports field, he lost his temper and punched someone when the team was organizing his luggage. When Jack arrived at his grandfather's house in the countryside, his defiant and arrogant attitude didn't change. His grandmother, with all the kindness in her heart, prepared a warm meal for him. Despite his rude behavior, his grandparents did not react with anger or frustration. Instead, they greeted him with a smile and patiently began preparing another meal for him. Later, the grandmother walked for 3 hours through the hills, deeply worried for Jack, hoping he would eventually realize the importance of education. After living in the countryside for over a month, Jack's heart began to soften. The unconditional love and care of his grandparents slowly melted away the resentment and rebellion he had held onto for so long. Upon returning to the city, Jack became more understanding, and he began to seek reconciliation with his parents. He wanted to spend more time with them and build a more meaningful relationship. Over time, Jack stayed in touch with his grandparents, who always remembered him fondly and sent him greetings on every special occasion. When children fail to show respect or seem to ignore you, the most important thing is to manage your emotions. Anger won't fix anything. It will only harm the relationship you share. Warmth, patience, and love are often the most effective ways to dissolve any resentment. This reminds me of an experience shared by a teacher, David Foster, from a class he once taught. At the start of the lesson, the students were being disruptive, causing a lot of noise that was making it difficult for the class to progress. One student, sitting in the front row, was banging her books on the desk, creating an unbearable noise. Then, she began coughing uncontrollably, which only added to the chaos. David knew the easiest option was to yell at her or even send her out of the room. Instead, he chose to respond with kindness and offered her some cough medicine, asking if she needed help. Surprisingly, after that, the class calmed down, and the session proceeded smoothly for the rest of the day. Napoleon once said that those who can master their emotions are greater than generals who conquer cities. People who maintain their composure not only reduce conflict with their children, but also find more effective ways to solve problems. If you want your children to respect you and take care of you in your later years, it's essential to learn how to control your temper, no matter the circumstance. Don't let your emotions take over. Over time, raising your voice or being authoritative doesn't always mean you're in the right. Sometimes, choosing silence can be the most powerful response. It creates peace within your home and allows time to reveal the truth. Only through harmony at home can the toughest challenges be overcome. Second, it's crucial to avoid arguments. Hold back your objections. Sometimes stepping away is the best strategy. Benjamin Franklin once said that arguments are like a game, but unlike any other game, no one truly wins. People tend to be patient with strangers but often lose their temper with family, especially in the dynamic between parents and children. It's so easy to let emotions take over, causing unnecessary fights and disagreements. Take the case of an elderly man named Robert, who often complained that his daughter was growing more distant and that every conversation ended in conflict. The truth was, when his daughter tried to talk to him about her life, he would interrupt her with criticism, saying things like, "Stop acting so childish, you're an adult now. Why haven't you settled down with someone? It's embarrassing." When she talked about her desire to change careers, Robert responded with disapproval, asking, "Why can't you stick to one job? You need to learn persistence." One day, Robert got excited about learning how to edit videos, but when his daughter tried to teach him, he became frustrated and lost his patience. He grumbled, "What's the point of learning all this? You're free now, yet you won't teach me something so simple." Every attempt at communication seemed to end in an argument, and both father and daughter were left upset and disconnected. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. Over time, Robert's daughter began to withdraw emotionally. The constant criticism from her father wore her down, and she eventually stopped sharing anything with him. Many parents can be overly strict with their children, preventing them from making mistakes or making their own decisions. When children act out or rebel, parents often respond with even more severity, which only pushes them further away. This creates a cycle of increasing conflict. As parents, when your children fail to show respect or seem indifferent, it's important to take an objective approach. If you've made a mistake, acknowledge it and set a positive example for them. If they're in the wrong, don't wield your authority to force your opinion on them. It will only lead to more rebellion. Instead, step back, stay firm but calm, and guide them towards self-reflection. The French author François de la Rochefoucauld once said that the idea of two people sharing the same thoughts, judgments, and desires is the most ridiculous notion. It's neither possible nor even desirable. Often, disagreements between parents and children aren't about who is right or wrong, but about the fact that each generation has its traditions, values, and responsibilities. These differences are often the root of generational gaps, making it hard for both parties to understand each other's perspectives. Young people, due to their lack of life experience, might dismiss their parents' advice, while older adults, as they age, often become more rigid and repetitive in their thinking. The best approach, then, is to show more empathy and patience. It's important to control the urge to argue with our children and to create some space for both of us to breathe. As noted in the book Awakening of the Parents, we need to gradually evolve into the kind of parent that meets our children's changing needs. As they mature and we grow older, it's vital to understand the challenges they're facing in their own lives and to accept their negative emotions. Rather than getting bogged down by everyday struggles with our children, it's wiser to focus on cherishing the time we still have together, taking care of our emotional health, and developing a solid plan for aging. This is the wisest choice we can make at this stage of life. Third, sometimes it's best to remain silent and keep our personal lives private. As the philosopher Schopenhauer wrote in The Wisdom of Life, we should keep our personal matters to ourselves, those things that others cannot observe with their own eyes. In every family, there are challenges, but when others get wind of them, instead of offering understanding, they often turn them into subjects of gossip or ridicule. If such personal matters get to our children, it can only deepen the family rift. Take the story of a farmer named Thomas Bailey from a small town in the American Midwest. Thomas had 2 sons and 3 daughters, and while his daughters were married, both of his sons remained single. Thomas had never had the opportunity to attend formal school, but he loved talking to his neighbors about his family matters. Unfortunately, his 2 sons were often disrespectful, fighting among themselves and staying out late playing cards. Out of frustration, Thomas would often complain to his neighbors about his sons' bad behavior. Before long, the entire town knew about the disobedience of Thomas's sons. When the time came for Thomas's sons to find wives, he worked hard to find suitable partners, believing that marriage would help them grow up and take on more responsibility. But because everyone in town knew about their poor behavior, no families were willing to marry their daughters to them. The sons, despite their flaws, had never been bad workers, but their reputation in the village sealed their fate. In reality, although Thomas's sons spent a lot of time playing cards and causing trouble, they were never unwilling to work hard. Despite their occasional quarrels, when their mother fell ill, both sons cared for her without hesitation, showing a deep sense of responsibility. However, as the saying goes, good news doesn't travel far, but bad news spreads like wildfire. Thomas's complaints about his sons became public knowledge, turning into a scandal that affected not only his reputation but also their chances of marrying. People may show a disrespectful or indifferent attitude toward their parents, but deep down, they still crave their parents' approval and validation. When parents continuously point out their children's mistakes or shortcomings, especially in public, it chips away at their children's self-esteem and alters how they see themselves. In the most damaging cases, children may fall into a state of self-doubt or resignation, thinking they are failures. As parents, it's important to approach these situations with compassion. Family disagreements should remain within the family. It's essential to avoid airing your children's flaws for others to see. A family should be a place of understanding, patience, and unconditional support, both internally and externally. Regardless of the ups and downs in your relationship with your children, always protect their dignity and refrain from letting others criticize or intervene in your family matters. Your home should be a safe space, a sanctuary. Creating and preserving harmony within the family is crucial. Mutual support and care for one another strengthen relationships over time and foster an environment of trust and respect. In the book Before You Leave, it's noted that the relationship between parents and children is a gradual process of separation, but it's also a journey of growth and learning for both sides. The bond between parents and children is filled with moments of joy and difficulty, especially as children seek independence. It's natural for parents to feel a sense of loneliness and confusion as they watch their children grow apart, but this should not be seen as the end of the connection. It should be viewed as the beginning of a more mature and wiser relationship. In a truly balanced family, no time should be wasted on petty arguments or needless confrontations. Parents who understand the emotional distance that may grow between them and their children respond with calm and patience, without the need to win every battle. The goal is peace, not victory. A father's attitude and a mother's emotions have a profound impact on the future of their children and the expectations within the family. By approaching family life with calmness, empathy, and patience, we not only preserve harmony in the home but also serve as a model of emotional stability and maturity for our children. In our daily lives, we all long for more understanding, more tolerance, and fewer criticisms and complaints. By embracing these values, we can create a warm, welcoming, and happy home environment for everyone. I'm 65 years old, and I spent a decade taking care of my daughter's children. A particular event ended up revealing the true nature of my daughter and son-in-law. My name is Susan, and I'm 65. I spent many years as a primary school teacher, and I've been retired for over 10 years now. I receive a small pension each month, just over $4,800, which helps cover my basic expenses. My husband passed away many years ago, and to avoid any complications for my daughter, I decided to stay single. After my daughter married, I thought about the possibility of finding someone to enjoy my later years with. However, my daughter didn't support that idea. She told me that remarrying would mean I'd simply become a free babysitter for some man, and that I'd get nothing out of it. At first, I didn't fully agree with her, but I decided to give it some thought. I had a good friend with whom I got along very well, and he suggested that we live together. I felt he was a suitable person to spend my golden years with, so I was willing to give it a try. However, since my daughter wasn't on board with this, I chose to set the idea aside. My daughter assured me that if I ever felt lonely, she would help by looking after her children, and that she and her husband would take care of me as I grew older. When my grandchild was born, I started caring for him, and it became my new life's focus. The next 10 years of living in my daughter's house turned out to be even more exhausting than when I was still working. As a teacher, I had 2 days off each week, along with the winter and summer breaks, plus all the regular holidays. But in my daughter's home, it felt like I was working non-stop from Monday to Sunday, from morning until night, without a single day off. Although that might sound like an exaggeration, sometimes it truly felt like I didn't have a moment to breathe. While my daughter and her husband gave me a small amount of money each month for my expenses, it was only $300, which barely covered my food costs. For everything else, I had to rely on my pension. The pension wasn't much to begin with, and every month it felt like I was draining it just to survive. Sometimes, I even had to dip into the savings that I had set aside for my old age. In those 10 years of living with my daughter, I could have saved enough to buy a house of my own. But the money came and went, and my daughter was my only family. As I grew older, I knew I would need to rely on her, so if I didn't spend on her and her family, who else could I depend on? But my perspective changed after a traffic accident in April that year. I was riding my scooter to buy groceries when I suddenly became dizzy and lost focus, which led to a crash into a car. Fortunately, the driver was kind enough to take me straight to the hospital. On the way there, I called my daughter and her husband to let them know. At first, I felt relieved, thinking they would be concerned about my well-being. But their response was nothing like I expected. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. Mom, did you get the car's registration number? We need to make sure they pay for the damages, they said. They were more interested in getting compensation than in my condition. I was too tired to argue, so I told them it wasn't anyone's fault. I got dizzy and crashed into their car. They didn't ask me to pay for anything, and they took me to the hospital. We should be grateful for that. I had fractured my fibula, and it would take months to recover. Since I couldn't thank them in person, I asked my daughter and son-in-law to go to the driver's place, buy a gift, and offer a note of thanks. But they just stayed silent, not responding to my request. Shortly after, my son-in-law received a phone call, and he apologized, explaining that he had work commitments before leaving. I spent nearly 2 weeks in the hospital, and aside from that one initial visit, my son-in-law didn't come back to check on me. My daughter explained that her work was incredibly demanding, and she couldn't find the time to visit. She wasn't much better, either. She didn't even take a single day off to come and care for me. Each day, she would call to check on me, but her visits were so few that I could count them on one hand. My daughter's house was only about 2 miles from the hospital, and I shared a room with an elderly lady who assumed I didn't have any children. Every time her daughter brought her meals, she kindly offered to share with me as well. I never corrected her, but the truth was, I felt like I didn't even have a daughter. When I was finally ready to be discharged, I called my daughter and son-in-law to help cover my medical bills. The hospital stay had lasted so long that my bill came to over $3,000. While I was able to recover a portion, I still had over $1,000 to pay out of pocket. They offered me a little help, but their response left me deeply disappointed. My son-in-law explained, "Mom, we'd love to help, but our incomes aren't that high, and we have a lot of bills to take care of. Our savings are nearly gone, and we just can't afford to do more. I earn about $700 a month, and my wife, your daughter, makes a little more than $500. We can only give you $300 a month for expenses. It was clear to me that, although they had more financial resources, they simply weren't willing to contribute further. I said to my daughter, after so many years of sleepless nights, sacrifices, and supporting you through thick and thin, I've always respected your decisions. I've always been by your side when you needed me. I've been a good mother, and I haven't failed you. You need to understand that in the last decade, I've invested so much in you. Now that I'm in need, don't you think it's time for you to help me? I poured out my heart, but my daughter showed no real interest in offering support. Instead, she insisted that I should understand her struggles and not press her for help. At that moment, I felt my heart grow cold toward her. After all these years of living together, I finally realized that I couldn't rely on her. She takes everything I offer but never tries to put herself in my shoes. She only takes it without ever feeling the impact of it. Despite everything, I still held on to hope for her. Perhaps this is what a mother's love truly means. No matter how our children behave, we never completely give up on them. But with this experience, I came to a painful understanding. My daughter was not someone I could fully trust. She is my daughter, yes, but her priorities lie with her husband and her children. I've done so much for her, and yet, she couldn't even contribute to my medical expenses. She may come around in the future, but I don't need to dwell on that. I already know where I stand. The reality is what it is. It won't conform to my hopes or desires. On the day I was discharged, I chose not to communicate with my daughter or son-in-law. Instead, I called my older sister to come pick me up. She arrived with my 2 grandchildren and took me to her home. Since my leg was still injured, living alone would have been difficult. I had considered hiring a nurse for a couple of months until my leg healed, but my sister decided to stay and take care of me. She prepared healthy meals for my recovery, and my 2 grandchildren visited me often, offering their care and attention. I couldn't help but feel a little envious of how attentive my sister's children were. Even though she is a bit older than I am, she seems much younger. I think it might be because she worries less, and I've come to realize that worrying less might contribute to aging more gracefully. The relationship with my daughter is something I can no longer change. What I can do, however, is live the rest of my life in the best possible way. From now on, I'll save my money for myself and not invest a single penny in her. I'm already 65, and it's not too late to open my eyes to reality. My mother passed away 3 years ago, and when my father turned 72, he decided to marry a 48-year-old caregiver. At first, I thought it was a positive thing. This woman seemed genuinely interested in him, not just in his money or his house. But when my sister, Minju, explained the situation to the caregiver, she left without looking back. It was then that my father realized everything had been an illusion. Now, I find myself in a similar situation. 3 years after my mother's death, my father wants to marry the caregiver he's been seeing for 6 months, claiming that she loves him deeply. I spoke to the caregiver while she was packing her things, and after our conversation, she left without a word. Yet, my father still insists that I am ruining his beautiful love story. My name is Emily, and I'm 52 years old. I retired 2 years ago, and my only son is still in school. My husband continues to work, and I'm an only child. Growing up, I was like a little jewel in the eyes of my parents. They showered me with love, giving me toys, and enrolling me in English classes and piano lessons. Among my friends, I was the only child, and everyone envied me. Over time, as my mother was hospitalized, I began to understand the complexities of being an only child. On one hand, I had the responsibility to care for my parents, and on the other, I had to tend to my in-laws, my husband, and my son. Sometimes, I can't help but feel that fate isn't fair. Why did it have to be me carrying all these burdens? In my youth, life seemed to flow effortlessly, but now, in my middle years, I'm facing challenges that others before me have already dealt with. When my mother fell ill, I decided to take an extended leave from work to care for her. My in-laws weren't happy with my decision, but my husband supported me fully. He always said that being there for your parents is something that must be done at the right time. Once they're gone, you can never go back and fulfill that responsibility. After my mother passed away, I tried to convince my father to come to live with me, but he refused. He said he felt it was his duty to take care of his own home and manage his daily life. So, I thought the best solution was to hire a caregiver for him. At first, the caregivers I hired for my father were women in their 50s who came by just to prepare 3 meals a day and handle a bit of cleaning. After I retired, I started visiting my father more regularly and noticed he had switched caregivers. This new caregiver was much younger. I initially thought she was in her 30s, but when I spoke to her, I learned she was 48 and had been divorced. She didn't seem to have the kind of complicated life she had described, and honestly, she didn't seem like a 48-year-old woman either. I decided to check her ID, which only raised more questions. When I asked how my father had met her, the caregiver told me she was introduced to him through a domestic service agency. I asked her for the name of the agency, but she couldn't provide it. Eventually, my father told me that other people in the community had introduced her to him. It turned out she was a distant relative from the area. After her divorce, she had no income and decided to work as a caregiver. I asked her what kind of work she had done before, and she explained that she came from a rural background, where she had taken care of children and done household chores. But when I looked at her hands, which were softer than mine, I couldn't help but wonder how someone who had worked in the countryside could have such delicate hands. I left my father's house and went to run some errands, but I also stopped by a neighbor's house to ask more about this caregiver. The neighbor didn't know much about her, just that she was a distant relative of the family. I asked if the caregiver was really 48 years old and whether she had always been at home. The neighbor couldn't confirm any details. Not long after, my father called me to come back home because he wanted to talk about something important. When I got there, he told me that he wanted to marry the caregiver, explaining that she wanted to stay with him, offer him a home, and help care for him as he aged. I asked him if he had talked to his children about this decision, but the caregiver quickly stepped in and said, "He doesn't have children. I'm divorced, and I had to leave my home. That's why I'm here." I suggested to my father that he go to the park and play chess with the neighbor while I spoke with the caregiver. However, my father insisted that I speak in front of him, so I told the caregiver that I wasn't going to engage in any ridiculous discussion, especially about personal matters regarding women. The caregiver looked at me in surprise, clearly not understanding what I was planning, as she nervously fidgeted on the couch after accompanying my father to the elevator. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. When I turned back to face her, I told her that I had spoken to the neighbor. She asked me what I had talked about, and I responded that the neighbor had told me that she had 3 children. I didn't understand why she had claimed to have none. At this, the caregiver grew visibly uncomfortable, her hands unsure of where to rest. I then said, "This house has been in my name since my mother passed. My father only receives a small pension and has about $20,000 in savings. Everything else, including this house, is under my name. If you're not being truthful with me, I may have no choice but to call the police or fire you." Immediately, the caregiver stood up from the sofa and handed me a piece of paper, scribbled with a few dates. I watched her silently, and she explained that it was a record of her time spent with my father. I had seen this kind of tactic before online, and it immediately raised suspicions. I told her to wait a moment and assured her I had something interesting to show her. I went to the security system in the house and pulled up the recordings of her actions. She had come into the house to collect her belongings, and I noticed that, before leaving, she had requested her payment for the month. I calmly told her that she had only worked half the month, and if she wanted to receive her full pay, she would need to leave my father properly. She seemed frustrated but didn't respond. She went into the kitchen to prepare the meal, and after lunch, she planned to tell my father what she needed. When my father returned home for lunch, he immediately noticed the tension between us and asked what was going on. I told him that the caregiver would explain everything. After we finished eating, I went to my room to rest, leaving the two of them to have their conversation. The caregiver told my father that her mother, who lived in the village, had called to say she was in the hospital and that she needed to go back to take care of her. Hearing this, my father, in his generous nature, pulled out a substantial amount of money from his bedside table to offer it to her. However, knowing she was probably being recorded, the caregiver refused the money, claiming that she had already received her salary for the month. But my father, always kind-hearted, insisted that he should give her something. Although he didn't want to intervene in the situation, he offered her about $10 to $20. From the living room, the caregiver called out, "Sister, I'm leaving," and I got up to see her off. I wished her a safe trip without following her any further. My father remained on the sofa, confused and deep in thought, knowing that he didn't want her to leave. No matter how much my parents loved each other, the reality is that older men, too, need companionship. I understood and supported my father's desire to have a companion in his later years, but I couldn't support this particular woman. She built her relationships on dishonesty. In reality, the neighbor never mentioned that the caregiver had 3 children. I was the one who had asked the questions, and it was only through that conversation that I learned the truth. Thank you for joining me on this journey through some difficult but important family dynamics. We've explored the complexities of relationships with our loved ones, how our emotions shape those interactions, and the importance of self-reflection and understanding. From navigating challenging situations with grace to recognizing when it's time to stand firm, there are valuable lessons here for all of us. So, what have you learned from this story so far? What's one thing that resonated with you and that you plan to bring into your own life moving forward? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave your comment below and share one key takeaway you'll practice in your relationships or personal growth. If you like this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. Your support means the world to me.